Very powerful stories, and you will hear more from that young man, Jamar Bright, coming up. Welcome, everyone, to a special Spectrum News Town Hall, North Carolina, Under the Gun. I'm Tim Boyd. Over the next hour, we will continue this conversation about gun violence, our gun culture, and if the two can coincide. We're going to hear from people who have lost loved ones to guns, like young Jamar, who's with us tonight. We're joined here in our new Charlotte studio with a full audience made up of people and organizations of both sides of the gun debate. They have come here with their questions. We've also assembled a panel of experts to make sure we have a balanced and real discussion about guns. You'll be hearing from North Carolina State House Representative Christy Clark, who's in her first term serving Mecklenburg County. Before that, she led North Carolina's Mom Demand Action, a grassroots group looking for safety measures to prevent gun violence. Paul Vallone, the president of Grassroots North Carolina. It is a self-described no-compromise gun rights organization to defend the individual right to keep and bear arms. South Carolina State House Representative John King, you heard him in that documentary. He has served York County for 11 years now. And Mecklenburg County Sheriff Gary McFadden, last fall, he was first sworn in as sheriff, but before that, he was a homicide detective with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police for more than 20 years. Tell us who you are and who you're with and your question.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and I'm with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. So what are the biggest obstacles for passing it's HB 454, which is the red flag laws? And then should it pass, what kind of impact would it have here in North Carolina? And what are the downsides, if any, to an extreme risk protection order?
Representative Christy Clark and Raleigh, this would be a good one for you since you are a current state representative in North Carolina. What can you tell us?
Yeah, and I'm also a sponsor of that bill. I'm proud to say so. The Extreme Risk Protection Order bill that we introduced is a step in the right direction into temporarily removing guns from people who are a danger to themselves or others. And you know what's blocking the passage of any gun law reform in this state is the gun lobby. Paul Vallone is a member of Grassroots North Carolina. They are our local gun lobby, and then of course the NRA is the largest gun lobbying organization in the country, and they are adamantly opposed to passing any kind of gun law that might save lives. And so those are the big things that get in our way when we're trying to do things to save lives, because it's critical to us when we talk about gun violence. We have to remember that these are people that are dying. There are people that are completing suicide with a gun. There are students in classrooms being shot and killed. There are our friends and family being shot as a part of a dispute between two people. And it's time for us to take steps to do whatever we can to save lives. And that is, in part, passing gun laws that will make it more difficult for them to have access to firearms. And so when we talk about what's going to get in the way, it's people that are opposed to any kind of gun law. And I'm open to meeting with Mr. Vallone and talking about what we can do with this extreme risk protection order to make it more palatable for him, because in my mind, any step forward in passing a gun law in this state is a good step forward.
Mr. Vallone, what would make it more palatable?
Well, first off, I should note that Grassroots North Carolina is an all-volunteer organization. We do not have lobbyists. We have grassroots activists, so we are not the gun lobby. Second of all, we are very much interested in saving lives. We just have a rather different opinion of how to do that than Representative Clark does. Now, with respect to House Bill 454, nobody wants mentally ill people to have, or unstable people to have access to firearms. In fact, people adjudicated as a danger to self or others have been prohibited from owning firearms since 1968. The problem is that we see people on the opposing side of this argument who are exploiting this issue to essentially incrementally restrict the private ownership of firearms. Take House Bill 454, for example. This bill would allow nearly anyone, including someone you potentially took out casually for a cup of coffee at Starbucks, to get a judge to declare you dangerous and confiscate your firearms. And by the way, you do not get an opportunity to participate in the hearing on which that is done, because these extreme risk protection orders are done in ex parte or emergency hearings where the defendant does not even get notice that the hearing is occurring, much less an opportunity to defend him or herself. And what's more, because it says a dating partner can determine this and have you declared to be dangerous. It doesn't define what dating partner is, nor does it define what danger to self or others means. So these highly arbitrary decisions could be made and essentially deprive people of their rights. But the more important thing, I think, is that nowhere in the Constitution can you be deprived of a constitutional freedom without due process of law. Therefore, these bills, by doing ex parte hearings, are in fact a constitutional violation of your 5th and 14th Amendments by not allowing you to participate in the hearing.
I'm going to go right back to Representative Clark since to respond to some of this. Does he make some points?
You know, I think he's intentionally being vague and to make this bill sound more inflammatory than it is. I know a lot of judges. I'm a paralegal. I work with them. I know that if you had gone on a casual date with a person for one time and then you decided to enact a streamer's protection order against that person, that the judge would not have any participation in that. They would throw it out because that's not what this is for. This is for times where people are afraid for their lives and afraid for their family members. And if that is something that we can work to define in the bill that's currently introduced, I'm open to that and I would love to meet with him to discuss it. I want to remind everyone that this is about saving lives. It really is. In states that have enacted this law, it has made people safer in their schools and their homes. It has reduced suicides and has reduced domestic violence. You know, in North Carolina, we have a voluntary surrender order in terms of 50B orders in relation to domestic violence, and that is something that puts people at risk. You know, most gun violence and mass shootings happen as a result of domestic violence, like the story that was shown before the commercial break. That's domestic violence, and those are times where we need to intercede. And women are 500 times more likely to be shot and killed in this country than they are in other developed countries, and passing a bill like this will save their lives.
All right, let's go back to our audience here. Larry, if you want to stand up. Mr. Larry Hyatt, for those that don't know you across the state, tell us a little bit about yourself and your question.
Well, my family owns the Hyatt Gun Shop, which is 60 years old this year, and I have seen a huge number of gun laws passed in my lifetime. And one of the questions was, what laws have really affected violent crime? After all those paperwork and all the permits and all the background checks and the concealed carry courses, the credentials, and what we put through people through to buy a gun, I would hope we have stopped something. Unfortunately, statistics aren't really showing that these things have a great effect because most of the criminals don't buy their guns from gun stores. Like the sheriff said, they steal them out of cars. So we've done so much expensive, time-consuming paperwork and not done a whole lot with it. Probably the only statistic that we have is the one that Mr. Malone showed with the concealed carry permit has showed some reduction in crime. The other issues, we don't really have a statistic that shows a crime that was stopped by someone with a gun. If a crime doesn't exist, doesn't happen, there's no statistic. So we're grossly underinformed about what effect gun ownership has in reducing crime. But like everyone here, we don't want the criminals or the mental patients to have them. And with talking about the background check earlier, we have seen some improvement in the information in the background check. There's more mental health information, more criminal information, and that system has progressively gotten better in the last 10 years.
Mr. Hyatt, thank you very much. So the question was, what laws have actually prevented violent crime? Mr. King, we'll start with you.
Well, obviously, that we need to do more. I don't think one law that has passed is a fix. I think it has to be a total reform of what we see as gun laws, especially in South Carolina. I've had 2 colleagues of mine to be killed, one in the Charleston massacre and one in Chester, South Carolina. I served on Chester City Council, and Councilman Odell Williams was killed. I served in the House of Representatives for the last 6 terms, and Clemente Pinckney, Senator Clemente Pinckney, was killed. There are things that we have to work on. I think what you find is watered down laws. If we were given a true opportunity to put and pass laws that are meaningful, then you will see a reduction. I look at the young lady that was killed in Fort Mill, South Carolina. If we were able to have a law that says someone who's mentally ill cannot purchase a gun in South Carolina, which we have, but all you do is put a check mark and no background check or no record to show that this individual is mentally ill, then how do we stop it? And where does it start and where does it end?
Sheriff, are current gun laws preventing violent crime?
Well, I mean, we could, again, I'm practical. We dance around with the numbers, we dance around with the language, we dance around with all of this. Who says it is? We are here tonight because of all the laws on the books, but we're still talking about violence under the gun. We have to go back to what are we doing to prevent that? I was surprised to see Mr. Hyatt here, but you know, before I was elected, I actually went to his shop, and we talk about preventative measures. You know, we talk about him selling a lock for a box so you won't steal it out of your truck. And you know, we can talk about this, but we have to be very mindful. It's the person who's pulling the trigger. It's the person who's causing the violence. I go back to conflict resolution. But then we also talked about, and we kind of skipped over this thing about the mentally ill, the person who's dangerous. Should we allow them to have the guns? Should we take the guns from them? That'll be a yes in my book. You know, take them, and then if they do have to ex parte, you know, I'm not going to go with, you know, with the fancy words and the legislation and all that. Take the guns away. If he proves himself to be stable, then he should prove himself to a court to be stable, and we move on.
Is it due process, though, like
Well,
Mr. Malone's worried about?
Well, he shouldn't be worried about it, I don't think. I don't think you should be worried about due process.
I think you should be very worried about it. I want you and Representative Clark to consider Gary Willis, the 60-year-old Ferndale, Maryland man who answered an unexpected intrusion at his door at 5:17 a.m. and was killed dead by police, okay, serving one of these ex parte warrants. Unaware, you know, he was unaware that any of this had occurred, and in fact, it was filed by a family member with a grudge. So the fact is, the standard of evidence is insufficient because it requires only a preponderance of evidence to issue one of these orders, which is a lack of due process. And frankly, I defy you to name any other constitutional freedom guaranteed by the Bill of Rights in which you can be denied without due process of law under the Fifth Amendment. And I can assure you, a hearing a month later after your guns have been taken from you, and by the way, under House Bill 454, the sheriff who confiscates those guns has no responsibility for what happens to the private property of the individual. So I defy you to find any other constitutional freedom which can be lifted from you without due process of law.
What I'm saying is back to this. It's good that you mentioned this, but we can't say Ruby versus Glock and all this other stuff. We're getting to the weeds of semantics. What I'm saying is,
Sir, my freedoms are not semantics.
I'm not saying your freedom semantic. When they introduced me as a sheriff of Mecklenburg County. If you look back what they said, my past experience was not paperwork. It wasn't the numbers. It wasn't research. It is a homicide detective for 22 years. So when you're talking about guns and violence and murders and what people can and cannot do, I'm not going on a paper. I'm going to what a person has talked to. Let me finish. I'm going to what a person has talked to me about. I respect what you're saying, and you should respect what I'm saying.
Oh, I deeply respect what you're saying, and in fact, your experience. Your experience is based on what you have seen with people, and I know a lot of police officers,
right,
and I know what you've seen, but unfortunately it's kind of a skewed sample.
No, I'm not saying that it's a skewed sample. If a person is mentally ill, would you want him to have the guns?
Obviously not.
Okay. If a husband and a wife are having an argument, and she says, I'm in fear for my life, and my husband, we can see where he has been beating or an assault, would you want him to have the guns?
Well, that's currently law, and
No.
But once again, under due process of law.
Would you want him to? Would you be willing for us to remove the guns?
Or would I be concerned that perhaps those accusations have been falsely made against him, as is quite often done? Actually, 32% of these extreme risk protection orders are rescinded by courts in Connecticut for being invalid. And if somebody makes an invalid complaint in North Carolina, under House Bill 454, the penalty is very minor. It's a misdemeanor.
But what do you tell the 34 people who have lost their lives this year then?
Well, I'm not clear that 34 people have lost their lives due to extreme risk protection orders.
34 people lost their lives to violence in this city. He just said that.
Well, I'm not sure that this addresses that. That's what I would say to
But
those
that is
people.
gun violence. And it's not an
Does
argument.
this address all gun violence? Is all gun violence the same?
No, it's
Okay,
not.
thank you.
It's not.
In fact, it does include things like suicide, a lot of other things that are
Right,
included in the statistics.
it's not a point for an argument. I'm just saying,
Unfortunately, what we see in the gun debate periodically is that gun control advocates lump together mixed intentionality, be it murder and suicide and accidents, in order to create a perception of gun violence which is not actually true. And that's an article in the Charlotte Observer I was talking about said, oh, we have this rate of 14 gun deaths per 100,000 people in North Carolina. Well, that's false.
So how do we get past this? How do we get past all
it's
this
only
to stop gun
it's half
violence then?
that. Okay,
That's the question, right? How do we get past all of this to stop?
Well,
gun
that's what I'm saying.
violence? I'm not pointing this at anybody in particular. I'm asking putting the question out there.
I would agree with them, but here's what I'm saying. I have to look at it from a point of violence. And when you say, what's your extent and the sheriff and all of that, I have looked at my past experience, which is very extensive, on guns and gun violence. Yes, sir.
Don't we have laws against violence against other people?
Yes, sir.
Yet the people keep breaking those laws every day. So adding another gun law, there's over 33,000 gun laws in the books today that aren't being enforced.
No, I'm not saying don't look at them or add. I'm not saying don't add them or add them. I'm saying we have to look at it from a different perspective. That's all. I'm not saying add, take away, or do all that.
I'm looking at a perspective of there are already laws against murder. It's in the Bible for starters, but there's laws against murder. There's laws against attacking somebody and hurting somebody. But now we're talking about adding more. Let's try to restrain this, restrain that. I mean, Representative Clark says she wants the red flag law come in. Well, let's put it in a proper perspective. I think that Ms. Clark, don't take this personally, I think you're driving very erratic. I think you're a danger to people on the road. Let's call the police and have your car taken away, and then you prove to the citizens that you can actually drive a car. That's what the red flag law is actually doing.
And it's Representative Clark, I want to go to you next since to respond to that, since he brought you up.
You know, I appreciate the frustration and the commitment to gun rights. I understand, you know, I grew up in a family of gun owners. My granddaddy taught me to shoot a gun in the backyard of his home when we were growing up. So I understand where they're coming from. But I also do have close relationships with people who have been directly impacted by gun violence, like Sheriff McFadden has mentioned. People who are relations to people who were killed in the AMU shooting, people who are relations to the victims of the Sandy Hook shooting. They are people that I call my friends, I call my family, and when I see the hurt and pain and suffering in their lives, it is on me as a legislator to do what I can to keep them safe and from things like that from happening again. And I am completely open to modifying the bill that is the Extremist Protection Order to make it be more amenable so that it's something that could pass, because I do believe that in some form or another that passage of that bill will save lives. And you know, background checks are the #1 thing that's been saving lives in this country. And I was just looking up the statistics, and since 1994, 3.4 million background checks have been passed and have been denied by people who should not have had ownership of a gun. And so that's telling us that that kind of law works and save lives. And whatever it is that we can do, like the point of this all is to save lives, to keep our children safe at school. I'm a mom of 5. So my kids are at school, they're in movie theaters, they're at concerts, they're at college, they're walking on the street, they're riding their bikes with their friends, they're out there in our community. And when I think about their lives, I want to do everything to keep them safe, and not just them, but people who are also in other communities around my county. It's on me as a legislator to find that pathway, and I am open to doing that. And if we want to have that discussion, we should have that discussion, because whatever we can do to save lives is what we should be doing.
All right, thank you very much. We got to take one more break. Thank you for a passionate but respectful discussion. We're going to continue more of that, including catching up with some of the folks that were in the documentary you saw just a short while ago. North Carolina Under the Gun continues after this break.
A gun is a gun. It's gonna do what it's meant to do. It's gonna kill. I don't get why people have to take other people's lives. That's something I really want to change. And I guess it's gonna start off with a handshake or a conversation.
Welcome back to North Carolina Under the Gun, our town hall tonight. And joining us in studio is who you just saw there, Jamar Bright. I understand you've grown about 3 inches since we saw you last. Thank you so much for being here tonight. It's been a few months since we caught up with you. Just tell us, if you can, how you and your family are doing.
Right. So far it's been good. We still have our moments where we kind of break down, but we get past those, and we try to see what comes next. We focus on brighter things, and we don't want to leave it there because we still have a fight to win, but on other days we get past it. And a lot of people ask us, how do we do it? Like, it's like we didn't lose anybody in our family because we were so happy all the time. And honestly, I don't know. My mom is very strong, and
I think you're strong.
thank you. But our family, together, we're not gonna back down from anything. So I just wanted to say we're holding up good.
I'm curious, you're 14, right? You're going to be 15 here in a couple weeks?
Yes.
Early happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
I'm curious your take as a 14-year-old, listening to this debate tonight and this discussion in here. What goes through your head? What are you thinking?
A lot of things goes through my head. I've been wanting to say something for a while, with all due respect. When they were talking about how kids bring their parents' gun to school, a lot of things go through my mind because this is my generation they're speaking on, and I want to see. I've been seeing how they've been dealing with this debate, and they've been saying how kids take their parents' guns and bring them to school, and how it shouldn't be loaded and stuff like that. Those are all good facts, but we need to really focus on the children themselves, the home they're raised in. The parents they play a big part in the situation that is going on in the household. There could be a dad beating on his son, and the son wanted to take it out on someone other than his dad. So he takes his gun to school and shoots up the school. So it's a lot of stuff that I want to discuss, but I really don't play a part in this, so I'll just leave it right there.
Well, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of people that disagree on a lot in this room, but I know everyone agreed. Right before we came on, they said, be strong for your brother, and we appreciate you being a part of this. Thank you so much. You can have a seat. We also want to bring in Debbie Harrison from Carson's Compassion Project, who's on this as well. Tell us about Carson's Compassion Project and how it's going.
So like I said in the documentary, Carson was my only child, and we were super close, and my whole world was taken from me in a moment. And so I had to spend my energy doing good and focusing on making sure love and light overcame the evil that took Carson from this earth. And so I started Carson's Compassion Project. It's a nonprofit, and we do some work in York County. Next month we'll be collecting stuffed animals to give to first responders, to give to kids in crisis. We did that last year. We got over 3,000 stuffed animals. We're aiming for 5,000 this year. Set your goals high. And then I have led teams of people to Africa to do work there in Carson's name also, as well as some other things we have going on. But, I was at a candlelight vigil last night in York County for families of violence victims, murder victims. And what I saw when I was standing in that circle was that we were from all different walks of life and all different age groups, and we were all affected by the same thing. And I don't know what the answer is, but I know that there needs to be some kind of reform. The man that murdered my daughter should have never been allowed to purchase a gun, but he was, and Carson is no longer here. So that whole circle of people last night that was standing there missing their loved one, it's as a result of guns. And I don't disagree that there's education that needs to happen. And I'm not saying take guns away from people. I'm just saying there definitely needs to be reform.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Jamar, thank you, both of you, for your strength in being here tonight. We have several minutes left, and It's been an emotional night. It's been a very passionate night. And so I kind of want to give our panelists a chance to sort of give us their final thoughts on what they want to see moving forward. Representative Clark, let's start with you in Raleigh.
Thank you. I really appreciate being on here tonight, and I want to say to Jamar that I really want to hear what you have to say, and I hope that you will come visit me in Raleigh, or I will come visit you in Mecklenburg County, because I want to hear what you are feeling and experiencing with your friends and your family and what you think is happening, because you are the future of this country, and I want to know what you have to say about what's going on. You know, I've been involved in gun violence prevention for a long time. I got involved after the Sandy Hook shooting. I didn't know a lot about gun laws when I started, and I have spent a lot of time studying them and studying what's important and what works. And what does work is having gun laws that prevent people who are a danger to themselves and others from having access to firearms. That is literally the simplest thing we can do. It's background checks, it's extreme risk protection orders in whatever form that is. And we need to be open to that and open to passing laws that can do that. If we can save one life, we're doing good. And I hope that we've had this conversation, we brought awareness to this issue, that it goes above and beyond just talking points, and it's people, it's about people, and I hope we can move forward on this. I am committed to my cause and to doing whatever I can to end gun violence and make steps to keep our community safer. That is something I am dedicated to and will continue to be until lives are being saved.
Representative Clark, thank you. We only got about 2 minutes left. Mr. Vallone?
Well, first off, I would like to note that North Carolina has done something that would prevent something like Carson's murder. In 2015, we passed a legislation which requires clerks of Superior Court to more readily report and immediately report involuntary commitments and other mental incapacities. And in fact, we've gone back and digitized those records through the Administrative Office of the Courts.
There's a difference between North and South Carolina.
Correct. That's correct. That was in South Carolina. Now, that said, our organization is interested in saving lives by enabling lawful citizens to protect themselves with concealed handguns. To that extent, we are interested, for one thing, in seeing some means of allowing faculty members to protect their students from active shooter scenarios, which of course have been a problem elsewhere, not so much in North Carolina, but elsewhere, even in places with stringent gun control like New Zealand. So we are interested in protecting children and saving lives.
Mr. Vallone, thank you very much. Mr. King, we've got about a minute left in the show.
And I'll be very short, but first of all, I want to apologize to you, Debbie, that we didn't do more to save your child. South Carolina owed you a lot more and owed the citizens of South Carolina a lot more. The gentleman should have never been able to obtain a gun in South Carolina. Should have never happened. And I will work with you and others to ensure that that never happens again.
Sheriff, briefly?
I think that this was a very good discussion. I think it was a very educational discussion, and I think we need more of that. We need both sides not to stay on the other side of the tracks. I think these gentlemen and these ladies and these young men and the owners of shops and myself are just a beginning, and I think if we have these conversations, we can come to some common ground. Education, conflict resolution, and gun safety will help us. All this background check and all this stuff, that's not going to work.
Sir, thank you so much. Thank you all for a passionate yet respectful discussion. I know there's a lot of issues we wanted to get to. We could do this for hours and hours and days, and hopefully we can all do it again in the future. Thank you so much. And thank all of you for watching at home. North Carolina Under the Gun. Have a great night.